Welcome to another episode of The Architecture of Health. I'm Deb Boyson, and this week my guest is Kate Deering. She's an author, she's a health coach. She's been around the fitness industry challenging assumptions about how our bodies work and use energy. And she was a huge influence on me when I found her first book, How to Heal Your Metabolism. Is that the name of the book, Kate?
You got it.
Yeah, and the reason I'm so happy she said yes to this interview today is she's got a new book called Better Energy, right?
Correct.
Okay, so Kate, in this show, we're all about unwinding places where we're either trying too hard or just are unaware about how the body works. And how do we get back to the simplest, cheapest ways to feel good in the long run? Sustainability first, right? And I think knowledge is the biggest part there, and a lot of it though is not doing things that we think are true, but they're not actually working. One of the things that attracted me to your work was you were laying out also these different ways to imagine health. Whether it's your body temperature, it's your fertility, it's all these ways that you could tell how healthy or unhealthy you were way before you have some major horrible crash of your immune system. So I would love to unpack, first of all, what were some of your whoa, the world is not the way I thought. Can you start by telling me a few of those?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been in the health and fitness industry since as long as I can remember. It's been my career since I was 22. So a good 30 plus years. I've been in some sort of the fitness health industry. And I've always had that belief, the physicality has always been a big part of it. As long as you were lean and fit, you were healthy. And so when I got into my late 30s, lean and fit, because you work really hard in the fitness industry to stay lean and fit. And a lot of times you're doing things that may not actually be healthy to maintain this physique that you think is the epitome of health. And so for me in my late 30s, it kind of started working against me. The harder I work, it just felt like things weren't moving any longer. The cleaner I ate or the more restrictive I got, I felt like I was pushing a rock or a boulder up a hill. So for me, that's when I ended up finding the work of Dr. Ray Peat, who kind of turned everything upside down for me. And I started kind of measuring different metrics and honestly, things I wasn't paying attention to at all. And one of those was body temperature and pulse. And because when you have a well running metabolism, your body temperature is warm. We usually say people are healthy at 98.6. And so, because when you're producing a lot of energy, you also produce heat as a byproduct. That's why kids are usually much warmer and elderly are much colder. And so, for myself, I was an athlete. I'd always worked really hard. Well, my body temperature at rest was around, 96.8, 97. So I was cold. And I was cold. I was always kind of cold. And I always just figured it was because I had, I was lean and didn't have a lot of body fat. And I was sensitive to the cold. And so kind of what I learned is I had gone through because I'd worked so hard to be lean and fit, with decades of doing that, I had gone through some adaptive processes. And one of those was my body was trying to become more efficient. And when it was becoming more efficient, it was learning to burn less calories at rest. Because it's like, you're going to work us so hard, we're going to learn to kind of not work things as well for you. So, and as you age, you don't initially notice them, but there are signs and symptoms. So I would be, I'd have some constipation issues. I was always taking something to help me go to the bathroom. Um, Sleep would start getting a little bit disrupted. My cycle was a little bit off. Certainly cold hands, cold feet. And so those were kind of these beginning stages of things. And then I started to have like weight loss, meaning in the sense, whatever I did, I couldn't move the needle if I wanted to lose a little bit of weight. The harder I worked, it was just kind of pushing back at me. So, I mean, I started just to think, well, maybe I'm 40-ish or getting to 40 and that's age. And so that's essentially what's happening. But when I started, like I said, kind of paying attention to these subjective measures, like, constipation is actually not a good sign or something wrong. Having an irregular cycle or a painful cycle is not good. That's a sign of your health. Being cold all the time is actually not good. It's a sign you're not producing heat efficiently. So I started to kind of shift my thinking around things. I'm like, okay, well, what does this mean? How do I improve these things? And can I do that just with food and lifestyle changes and so forth? And what I learned is, yes, certainly, and it changed how I thought about different foods, right? Because I was very carb restrictive before, because carbs inherently, you know, they make you gain weight and you become a carb addict. And I definitely was. I did a lot of restricting and binging. I felt like I couldn't have sweet carbs in my house ever because I would overconsume them. I didn't know how to stop when I was, consuming them. So I learned that, like, those are symptoms of something. If you are constantly craving carbs, it's probably a sign that your body inherently needs them. If you feel like you can't, if you're restricting and then you're getting hangry and angry and mood issues, that's not a good thing. And so I learned about, how do I stabilize my system? How do I feel good all the time? What can I do so that I don't have these binging and I don't feel like I constantly need carbohydrates all the time? And what does that look like? And so I had to change how I thought about health. It wasn't just about my weight and my fitness. It was about all of these other metrics. And when those were starting to correct, it was interesting to me what happened symptomatically, because these symptoms went away. But my view started to shift too. Like, oh my God, I the first time in my life, I'm not constantly craving carbohydrates or thinking about my next meal. Or, I can have these foods in my house and be totally fine around them. Oh my God, actually, I'm not addicted to carbohydrates or sugar. It's actually, I was just not supporting my system properly. And that's what was presenting it as, that was my being. I was basically creating that feeling.
So it sounds like there are also two sides here. One was how hard you were working yourself, and
Yep.
then another is what fuel you were putting in and your ideas about what's a sustainable fuel. Did
Mhm.
how so since I do so much movement coaching, how did your philosophies around how hard and how much to work? Because I know, Kate, when I was in my 20s and maybe my 30s, I would overexercise and then not have menstrual periods. So much of the time, I didn't even have to think about whether I needed birth control.
Mhm.
And then when I became 40, I was very nourished for a year and I got pregnant and I had a son. And then suddenly I had to heal him. And then all my ideas about what to eat and not eat and what kind of exercise to do and not do changed. But how has, so I would like to hear about the exercise, a quantity in the better energy balance, and then switch into diet sort of myths.
Mhm. So for me, when I started, I definitely was an overexerciser, right? I was in the fitness industry for most of my life, and so you're always getting a badge of honor when you train hard and push hard and more, 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 and how much can I do? And so that was my philosophy. I just thought, I had really good willpower. I was very disciplined, and I had this commitment. No matter what was going on, I was going to get that training session in. And in my 20s, I'd probably train 2 hours a day, and I would play competitive tennis. And then I got into distance running. I ran a lot of half marathons, ran a marathon. I would do these crazy hikes and so forth. And so, and I'm not saying don't do those things, because there's some level of that those are things to do, and it has goal oriented things that you can do. But I was using them as mechanisms to try and just train super hard. So once I realized, okay, my body has gone through some adaptive measures, it's trying to figure out how to utilize less internal energy for my system so I can do all this activity. I had to shift. So I certainly pulled back my training quite a bit. Um, it was very hard for me, I'll be honest with you, and I tried to pull it back, but your mentality is, and I was so addicted into senses like, "Oh my God, I still have to do these things." So it took me a while to unwind that. And so for the first year, I tried to pull it back. I tried to eat more. I gained some weight. It was really hard for me to adjust. I really started training less, honestly, when I ripped my ACL in my knee, and I couldn't train. So I think the universe was like, you're not listening. So we're going to give you this injury so you stop doing all this stupid shit. And I did. And I was amazed how well my body was like, thank God you stopped doing these things. So I learned real quickly that, oh, I don't have to do all this stuff to stay actually healthy and fit. And actually, my body actually really liked that I didn't do that. And then again, I had to change my perspective again about like exercise. I'm like, okay, there should be a reason why you're doing this, not just because it's about crushing yourself. It's like, why are we doing this? What is our goal with this specific exercise? And then let's achieve that. And we don't have to be in here for 2 or 3 hours. My training now is so different. it's so minimized. Now I'm like, what's the least I can do to get the maximum result versus crushing myself, and seeing how well if my body can recover from it.
I heard a few words in there. One was how your body had adapted, and when you just kept piling on more and more, and
Yep.
adaptation train was, uh, you couldn't. Yeah, you needed to break the cycle and be more variable. It sounds like in the way that you train, so that your body just wasn't expecting another hard load. And it's funny because I too, now that I'm 58, I'm definitely cherry picking what are the very finest metabolic fruits in my movement practice. And I've picked sprinting a couple of times a week for 15 seconds because I can get a hormonal change that'll persist past the session. But then you can't do it that often. People, you overdo that, you're in the cortisol cascade, and the belly fat's just going to keep piling up because you're in a stress state too. Are you weight training, I'm guessing?
Yeah. So I do probably 3 sessions of weight training, but they're probably 20 or 30 minutes now. That's it. And then I literally do hiking and some minimal kind of intense training, but it's very, very minimal. And I want to say is that adapting to your exercise isn't inherently a bad thing, specifically if you're trying to do an exercise that has a long load, I mean, a long time in it. You're going to adapt. So since then, I've still done like 100-mile bike rides, and with the understanding that my body was going to be more efficient. I want it to be more efficient because I'm going to have to go a very long distance. And because when you create more efficiency, like your body learns to not work as hard to get you there. And so, but you understand that you are creating efficiency. That's why endurance athletes have lower heart rates. They can kind of go harder without eating as much, right? If you're not going to see an Olympic, marathon runner like eating tons of food while he's trying to compete this exercise because his body's burning it up such a high rate. It's not going to do that. You will see that an Olympic marathon runner is going to be really, really thin because the body's adapting to that longer term training session, right? It's saying we don't want to hold a lot of muscle. It's not going to really work with this exercise. But if you see a sprinter, very, much more muscular because they need that power movement, they're not going to be. So we can look at that body type and assess, okay, well, what kind of things do we want? But if you know inherently you want to run a marathon, you are going to create efficiency. And I understood that when I did these longer distance things. And then I actually said, well, now you have to recover, right? Now you need time to recover to get back to a more metabolic engine because I was like, it's great. I accomplished it. Now let's recover. Let's create more like metabolic waste per se. Let my internal basal metabolic improve again so it doesn't need to be as efficient as it was before because we want more energy to be utilized internally to balance the systems, to support all the systems of the finger versus just worrying about, having to go 100 miles on a bike or whatever.
Oh, yeah. So designing a lifestyle that'll work depending upon your goal, right? And one of my goals is to actually
100%.
be able to sit around. I do like to use my computer and not and eat bonbons. Yeah. So the engine, I like that you use that term. There's a different performance metric for doing an endurance race versus sprinting. Different kind of cars. If you were looking at a race that would be a Formula One race car has a very different engine than a car that's going to drive across the coast with the lowest amount of gas used, right? So
100%.
so how have you and then and yet you the most important thing I think is you have knowledge about how to tune the engine.
Mhm.
How do you tune that engine metabolically with your food? And now you've started by talking about, a heart rate and basal body temperature. Are those some of the main metrics you're using to then decide how to feed the engine?
Mhm. Yeah. So when we look when we're looking through the window of energy production, so now I've changed what I'm doing within people and what goal we're looking to achieve. So if you're looking to improve energy production, and what you need to understand is all the systems of your body run on energy, right? I try to always make it clear that you don't run on food, you run on your body's ability to convert that food into energy, and it's the energy that you create that runs your system, supports the function, supports the structure. So we want to create a system that produces lots of energy so you have ample amount of energy to run all the systems of your body effectively. Because if that system gets broke and you don't produce energy efficiently, you don't produce a lot of energy, and then you have a lot of demands, like you're doing a lot, there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of activity, then your body's going to do, well, I'm going to take from Peter to pay Paul kind of thing. I'll take from your digestive system or your bones or your detox system or whatever it is, and we're going to lower that function, right? That's why when you stop eating, you start eating less or you're doing more, you have things like constipation show up, or you have GI dysfunction, because your system's basically saying, we don't have enough energy to run that optimally right now. So we're going to take that energy and use it for your stress, or like I said, whatever you have going on. And your body's always trying to create that homeostatic space so that it can keep you going. Its number one job is to keep you alive. It's not to procreate, it's not to build muscle, it's not to actually poop and pee. It's not. It's to keep you alive. The other things kind of fall into place. But if we support the system optimally, we can keep all the systems running properly. And when the systems are running properly, we can keep sickness and illness and disease, because all of those things are a byproduct of a body that's unable to keep up with the demands, and it's a lower energy state, and so things start to break, right? It's basically like we don't have the resources to keep supporting, the repairs of your house. It starts to break down. It doesn't happen immediately, but if we don't keep painting it and making sure that the holes are things will break, and then they will more rapidly break at the end because we haven't been taking care of it. Your body's the same kind of way. And so I'm always into that metric of, how do I create energy to support that system so that we don't get in there? And that's the lens I look through now, versus the lens isn't, how do I create this fast, marathon, or how do I create you to be able to do this? That's a whole different lens, and that requires different things. And I think where people get confused in the nutrition space is that you hear all these loud noises out there, but they're all coming from different lenses. So you hear this other lens, like, this is the way. And you're like, yeah, but you need to apply it to what you're trying to do. Not just everyone needs to do that. And so everyone that contradicts each other, and it gets very confusing. And so I'm always like really clear, like, look, I'm only coming from a space of energy production. That's what we're trying to do. That's the metrics I'm going to use. We're going to use things like body temperature and pulse, because I know when you produce more energy, which would make sense if I build a bigger fire, which we refer to as your metabolism, that fire is going to produce more heat. And so if you become warmer and produce more heat, right, then I know that things are moving in the right direction.
Wow. So, and I remember when I read your first book, Healing Your Metabolism, I remember the idea of eating enough, and that there might in the short term be a little weight gain as your body gets gains confidence that the energy supply is going to persist and not be some sort of scarcity model. Do you want to speak much about that?
Yeah, and that's a good question, because a lot of people think, oh, because you need food to burn, right? Just like you need wood to burn in a fire, right? I mean, the problem is, if you had a tiny little fire and you just went and put a huge log on it, there isn't enough energy there to burn that big log yet. And so it just puts out the fire. Same thing, if you've adapted to a very lower energy state, and if you eat any more than 1,000 calories, you start gaining weight. Now, optimally, for your body to run the best, it might actually need 2,000 calories. However, if you go from 1,000 to 2,000 overnight, you are just going to gain a bunch of weight, because your body hasn't learned to burn at that capacity yet. Just like that very small fire isn't able to burn that big log yet. We have to move it slowly. So we have to so we add calories in slow and steady, and then we reevaluate. How do you feel, right? How is this going? And if the problem is, if somebody already has some metabolic adaptations, meaning they have insulin resistance, poor blood sugar control, fatty liver, then you have to kind of move within a different space, because now they actually don't use the resources very well or properly, or there's something inhibiting it from using. So then we have to kind of ask more questions like, well, what could be inhibiting their ability to utilize glucose properly? What's getting in the way here? What do we need to address more first, possibly before we start adding more calories in, so we don't just gain a bunch of weight?
Excellent point. And one question about the resting heart rate. I remember being stunned because I was so proud as a an athletic person, my heart rate was so low. I remember my dad's also being weirdly low, like 50 beats a minute. And
Mhm.
he wasn't an endurance runner or anything like that. And when I got introduced to these ideas of these totally different metrics than I was used to, as far as possibly being a sign of stress,
Mhm.
then I'm now my heart rate is much faster and I do much more resting and recovery when I do some kind of explosive activity. But I remember uh, being introduced to the idea of how quickly their heart beats
Mhm.
versus either someone who's so efficient because they're an endurance athlete or who has low blood pressure, low blood sugar, something like that. You want to talk about what zone of resting heart rates you use to tune your work?
Yeah, so heart rate, if you go to the doctor and your heart rate's like 50, he's like, "Great job, you're super efficient. We want you to have a low heart rate." Because heart rate can be a sign of stress. So someone who has a lot of adrenaline, who is a very, very stressed individual can also have a high heart rate. And this is where we get confused. And this is where modern medicine does not differentiate between a stress system and a one that's running on healthy thyroid function. Because you do want a healthy thyroid function, you will have a heart rate around 75, 85 beats per minute. That's saying your body's working, you're creating lots of energy, and again, your body turns over. So your cells kind of turn over themselves. You're not like a car where once, you run it too hard, it just breaks. You don't do that as a human. Your cells turn over, they reproduce, you can kind of and the more energy you produce, the better we do that. That's why young people who have a very high running metabolism have a higher heart rate, they're warmer, and they heal much faster. When as you get older, you are less efficient, you are more adaptive. A lot of older people have very low heart rates. They're usually quite cold. They're cold all the time. That's why they all move to Florida, because they're they're cold. And it would kind of make sense. Their bodies are becoming less efficient. It's slowing down. What else do older people do? They're not as hungry. They don't eat as much, right? So they pull less food in. So there's just less metabolic food to burn, and it's just they refer to it as part of the aging process. And so okay, but there are things you can be more kind of aware of, because look, as you age, it isn't ideal to be smaller and smaller and smaller, because you'll get more frail and frail and frail. And when you're frail, you have a more chance of falls, you have more chance of pretty much everything. And so we want to do everything we can to preserve the mass that you have, muscle mass, right? Everything. So that's why, doing some strength training is very beneficial as you get old, but it's also very important that you eat enough. You eat enough protein, you eat enough things so your body's not going to catabolize itself or break itself down, because now you're creating this state of inefficiency. Or for a lot of people, they're actually in a chronic state of stress. And you can be in a chronic state of adaptive stress where the heart rate's quite low, or they do have a higher heart rate, right? But the way we kind of establish a difference is if you have a high heart rate, but you're also symptomatic, meaning I feel very anxious, or depressed, or I cannot sleep, I feel very wired, my hair is falling out. A lot of those things that would kind of show, okay, that system is more stressed. You could also have a higher heart rate. But if you have a well-running system metabolically run by thyroid, you're going to be sleeping well. You have good energy through the day. You're going to be able to hold muscle mass, right? So there's a difference. So we have to not just use one metric. We need to put it into kind of, what else is happening kind of question.
Yeah, that's great. If I hadn't also known to look at body temperature and then hair quality, it's funny when I started working on my circadian rhythms, my thinning thyroid stressed eyebrows, then it
Mhm.
started to grow back in. So I'm glad between you and Chinese medicine, I have learned more than one variable to look at. But I will say, um, just could not tell at the time. What was it? I was 30 something and I was exercising 3 hours a day
Wow.
and I weighed 40 or 50 pounds more.
Wow.
I was I wasn't sleeping well. I wasn't eating well because I was like vegetarian at the time and
Mhm.
eating rice and beans, burritos, that's it pretty
Okay.
much. So I knew that there had to be a better way. And then a lot of this work makes sense, but what would you say are the signs? Well, I just listed a few of the signs that someone is under fueled or that their metabolism is off. You've been listing that you're cold,
Mhm.
your hair is falling out or not growing back
Yeah,
as
and maybe it just
well?
doesn't grow quick enough. It could just be falling out. There's skin. You could have poor skin, poor nails. Nails could be falling apart, right? Really thin. So there's kind of those because all of that takes energy, right? People have very slow growing nails. Um, your body doesn't heal like if you get a cut, it takes forever to heal. And again, we can just use the metrics of the elderly versus the youth. We can see the differences and what kind of happens to them. But usually, maybe you're constipated, you don't go to the bathroom. Every couple days you're going to the bathroom. Somebody that's metabolically stressed will be peeing a lot through the day. They might pee 10, 20 times a day, where they're peeing throughout the night. You don't sleep, you can't fall asleep, and you can't stay asleep. You don't feel rested upon waking. You might have anxiety and or depression. It's very mood based. When you are well supported, you will always have a better mood because you're more stabilized. So those are some of the metrics. Plus, yes, body temperature, pulse, your warmth, cold hands, cold feet. Those are all pretty important metrics that we can take subjective, and good hormone function. So low libido would be a sign of a poor running metabolism or infertility. So if someone cannot get pregnant, that's your body is not going to procreate if it feels it's kind of in a state of like just survival mode. So, getting pregnant, there's a lot of fuel that needs to occur. And a woman needs to also be probably at a certain body fat percentage for the body to be more optimized to get pregnant. And so if you are and I do see it with a lot of fitness women or really type A women who are just like grinding it out, they have massive fertility problems, right? And so they go to these fertility clinics when basically they just need to go slow down. You need to feed yourself. We need to support your nutrition. We need to make sure you're sleeping. And then we need to create the environment, which is your body, that your body will want to support getting pregnant. If you're constantly stressed, yeah, you're going to have problems with your cycle. Maybe you're in ovulation, you're not even ovulating anymore, because your entire cycle takes a lot of energy to function properly. And when the body is under stress, that HPA, or I think of the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, when that is activated under stress, it actually tells the HPO, the hypothalamus pituitary ovary axis, to shut down. So it's like women will just not cycle appropriately. So there's a lot of metrics that happen. Your body is an amazing thing. It's always communicating with all of the hormones and organs to say, look, you're pushing us too hard externally, meaning you have all this stuff going on. You're working me too hard. We're staying up too late. We're partying. We're working out hard. And we don't have enough energy to support your internal functions. Certainly, we don't have enough to make a baby. So we're not gonna. Or if a woman gets pregnant, then you might see a miscarriage in the first couple of months because the body's like, nope, we just can't flip it over, and we're not going to be able to support it. So we have to always think about, look, we need to make sure the body is stabilized, that what we're giving it can run the internal systems appropriately. If not, we are going to have symptoms.
I love it. And I heard you talk earlier about how you had a changed relationship to carbohydrates, and your work helped me have that too. There were years I would find an immediate good feeling from going low carb, and I would get skinny, then I would get mean. And then my kidney or something would act up, and then I would go back to carbs, and I always had this very love-hate carb thing going on.
Hmm.
But so and I'm pretty sure you'll say there are not all carbs are created equally. How
Sure.
Tell me a little bit about the story of a healthy relationship that you have achieved and helped other people achieve with carbs.
Yeah, so carbs are certainly not evil. I think what happens to a lot of people is first they attribute carbs as like cookies and cakes and sweet things and kind of, a loaf of bread. And again, those have carbohydrates in it. And yes, bread is a carbohydrate. A cookie is definitely fats in there as well, plus carbohydrates. And, I have a viewpoint that there is no bad food. It is just food. And so we do need to get over that so that we can say this is not a bad food, but we do need to understand kind of how it's going to work in our system. So your body uses both fats and carbs all day long, all the time. There's never a time that you're purely burning carbohydrates. If there's never a time you're purely burning fat, even if you're not eating carbohydrates, you're still utilizing carbohydrates because your body's making its own. So again, there are certain systems in your body that can only use carbohydrates as fuel. Like all the red blood cells can only use carbohydrates as fuel because their job is to carry oxygen throughout your body. And we don't want to use oxygen. So we need carbohydrates, right? We have to use glycolysis as a way to create energy in the red blood cells. And that is an anaerobic kind of way to create energy. And only carbs can do that. And so without having carbs or making them, you would be dead in a second. So they are essential to life. And that's why our body can make its own. Because if we go into a place where we don't have any, we will make some, which is amazing. And that's usually an argument for a lot of low carb diets. We don't need them because we can make them. And I go, that is true. We absolutely, and we can certainly live without them. It's just not ideal. Again, because if we don't like eat them, again, our body will make them, but that comes at a cost. So anytime our body is forced to go into a process or more, in an excessive amount of what we refer to as gluconeogenesis is when our body's ability to make its own carbohydrates, it comes if you push it into that system too hard. It's very adaptive. The body senses we don't have enough carbohydrates coming in. We're going to make you some, but we feel that we're going to slow down other metabolic functions because that is your quickest and preferred use of fuel. And we don't want to break down all your tissue and your muscle and everything else. So to compensate, we're going to try to lower some metabolic functions down. So your body, again, will always try to compensate. Oh, we'll burn some more fat, or we're going to try to make some ketones. And again, it can do that for some time, for some people for years and years and years. But down the road, what we end up starting to see is there starts to become a compromised system. And again, it can do it for a while, but I always say when you give up carbs, you're like one step closer to a stress system because carbs are anti-stress. Because if we look what happens, let's just say we look at your stress system, and part of that is your HPA axis, your adrenals, they're making your stress hormones, you're making cortisol and adrenaline. Those hormones elevate when the message is we need to make more energy. And so they're going to elevate because we don't have enough coming in or we can't get it in quick enough. So those stress hormones will elevate to try to break tissue down and tell your body to make more so that we can dump it into the blood and use it. So those stress hormones will lower when enough fuel comes in, specifically glucose into the blood. When the message is there's enough glucose, those stress hormones will lower. And so carbs inherently, if our body's in stress and we consume them, that will lower the stress response. That's why a lot of people, when they do feel stressed and they crave sugar or they crave carbohydrates, it's literally your body saying, we are stressed, we need fuel. The problem becomes is people end up not choosing the best one. Maybe to get the carbs down, the stress response down the quickest, you just need a glass of orange juice or some fruit or something that might kind of alleviate that response. But instead we choose the pint of ice cream and the cookies or too many of the cookies. And what happens with those foods is because there's such a considerable amount of fat in those foods as well. Then if our body's stressed, it's needing carbohydrates immediately. You're eating this high fat, high sugar food. So it takes a lot longer for those carbohydrates to get into the blood system and for the feedback to work. So by the time your body's finally like, oh, we got enough, you've just consumed 1,300 calories of fat and sugar. And now your body's like, we don't have anywhere for all this to go. You just ate a bunch of sugar that is helping with the stress response, but you've also just consumed a copious amount of fat. We can't use all of this, so we're just going to store it for you. So we're going to push it into your fat cells and we'll store that and then so forth. So then people think, oh, I'm addicted to sugar. Every time I have sugar, I eat this, sugary but fat food, and then I just gain weight and then I feel bad about myself and they rinse and repeat. But if
Wow.
yeah.
I was going to say that's exactly what happened that time. I gained so much weight. I'd come home exhausted. I'd ridden my bike up a steep hill after a dance class, after all day of work, and I would eat ice cream because my roommates were asleep and I didn't want to bang the pots and pans around. So that's a key distinction, is having the carbs with fat or without fat, right? And isn't it also whether the carbs deliver a mineral payload?
Yeah, that would be important. Normally when you eat carbohydrates, or any food of that matter, you want to have nutrition with it as well, because none of these things work independently. And when we look at, and I kind of go into a deep dive into this specifics in this newer book to try to help people understand like why food is always best nutrition, because when we're trying to create energy, you need kind of the substrate, which is the glucose or the fat, but that substrate going through your cells is dependent on numerous enzymes and metabolic functions. And all of those enzymes and coenzymes are supported by minerals and vitamins. So if we lack any of those, then the entire system gets backed up. And so we want to make sure everything is there, because if any of these are missing, like then the system slows down. And so even when somebody needs a lot of energy, and you might even have the energy source, if we don't have all these kind of supporter factors, it can't make it properly. It's almost like if you have, your machinery, if you have something that needs to convert on this conveyor belt, and we want it to move quickly because we want to make a lot of product. But if we don't have some of our workers there because they're all called out sick, then it's going to move a lot slower. And so even though we have this demand, we just can't keep up. And so unfortunately, then the feedback loop is bring in more fuel, right? Or bring in more. And that's when you start to see people that start to have high blood sugars, insulin resistant, is because they're in this perpetual feedback. We need more energy. Your system's not converting it fast enough. So we're going to make more, even though you have enough in your blood, we're going to dump more in that, raising your blood sugar up even higher, backing up the system. So you perpetually have high blood sugar because you just can't use it quick enough. And so that's why you have to address everything. And that's why food always with nutrition is better. It doesn't mean you can never have a Twinkie or whatever it is, but you want the majority of your diet to be supportive with nutrition. And specifically, if you're sick or you're trying to heal your system, yeah, ideally, you might have some nutritional deficiencies. Our food quality is not as good as it used to be. A lot of it is our soils aren't as good. And look, the American diet is 70% processed. We started convenience. There was a lot of societal changes that happened within our culture. Women went to work. We needed to have quicker food. The industry's like, hey, well, we're going to support you with this. We'll make some quick foods and dinners. Now we're going to prepackage everything. It was all built on convenience because we didn't have time anymore to go shopping every single day, use fresh food every single day. Now we're like, we need quicker food. I need to throw it in the oven or whatever that looks like. So the industries said, we're going to give you a solution to that problem, but it created other problems, right? Because it always does.
Right. And the funny thing is, when I went without processed food, when I started down that route years ago, I ended up creating other deficiencies like salt, because I didn't realize how much of the salt I was getting had been from crackers and bread, and I went gluten-free, and slowly figuring out how important the minerals were, especially a high quality salt, and how important the electrolytes and the minerals are for hydration. I was an overhydrator too, just chugging the water and
Peeing all day long.
and peeing all day long, and
Mm.
diluting all of my minerals and electrolytes. So
Mhm.
I'm past that, but I gotta say it's still tricky. Like I end up wanting, like you said, we're alone, we're cooking, we're in a hurry, or we're cooking for ourselves. We're not in a family structure where there's more shared labor around food. So we're sharing our labor with the stores and the food producers. So how do you end up so something then would be attractive to me like desiccated liver, but then that's really easy to overdo because I like that's not natural to eat liver every day either. So tell me, how do you get your minerals? How do you get all these cofactors without um, overdoing it in one area?
Yeah, it's a good question because everything is dose dependent, right? There's nothing on this earth that you can't have too much of. Oxygen, too much of that, you're going to create problems. Water, too much of it, you're going to create problems. So we can give somebody too much of anything and create problems. At the same time, not enough is also problematic. And we live in a very black and white world, and that's what sells. The extremes are very profitable. And so the nuance is not as profitable, right? So people are like, tell me exactly what to do, and that's bad and that's good, and that's what I'm going to buy. I want to be certain. And I'm like, there's no certainty of any of it. And so we have to have a lot of nuance, which, you have to kind of think a little bit. And that's why I really try to help people understand their systems better. Because if you understand the foundational systems, then you'll stop asking this or that. You'll just say, oh, when I feel this way, I need that. And when I feel this way, I'll need this. And so it changes. But yes, it takes a little bit of thinking. And when people are really unwell, they don't have the capacity, right? They just can't do it. And so it certainly helps them to have someone work with you so you can go, okay, you know what? This is what you're going to do, and that's it. And that we're going to build that layer. And then when you have a little bit more capacity, we'll get to that next layer. So getting back to like nutrients, right? I mean, I honestly, like, I'm like, here's the food, right? I talk about that in the first book. I'm like, here's how you can make all the nutrients with just food alone, right? And that's normally having a variety of different animal proteins, using fruits and well-cooked vegetables or well-prepared vegetables are all good because they are usually decently filled with nutrition, or minerals. You're going to get a lot of your vitamins from animal proteins, and a lot of your other minerals with seafoods and so forth. And then, of course, I'm a fairly large proponent of dairy as long as someone tolerates it because it's a high calcium food. It has a decent amount of carbohydrates and protein and carbs and other minerals in it. And so I do have people use things like Chronometer, like a food app, because that actually will specify if you're meeting all your nutritional needs in the app. And so it'll break it down for you. So I've definitely found that, I can get people, usually I'm always trying to get them to slowly eat more, but we can certainly get most of their nutritional foundation in at 14 or 1500 calories if we kind of really make sure we're eating the right foods, and then we build from there. Because a lot of the problem is, people that have gone through dieting for a long time and they're eating less, and maybe they're eating pre-packaged foods and so forth. So when you eat a lot less, there's less opportunity for nutrition because you're just eating less food. So there's less nutrition. So then what do? They start supplementing with 100 different supplements, and which could be quite costly. And then they could be over supplement, So what we usually end up getting is just very expensive pee that they're just peeing a lot of this stuff out. Now, I'm not saying that some supplements aren't good and some people absolutely need certain supplements, but from my experience, foods that contain optimal nutrition are always going to work better. And they do work better. So, I love beef liver. I think it's a very valuable food. Yes, it does have a lot of vitamin A in it. It does have a lot of B vitamins in it, and copper, iron, zinc. It's a high nutrient food. You don't want to over consume it though. You can do too much. And it depends on the person. If the body is inefficient, isn't running properly, if you give it a ton of beef liver, you'll over vitamin A it. And so you have to kind of know the system you're putting it in. But is it a high nutrient rich food that can really support a lot of people? 100%. Do I also meet people that have eaten way too much of it? Absolutely. Too much is also going to be problematic. So we have to understand that there is these are good, but be careful to not overconsume. And so I usually give a basic guidelines. Maybe a couple ounces a week is plenty for you, but also pay attention to these other metrics. I find most people are undernourished. They are been eating, maybe 30-40% of their diet is processed and they aren't even aware of it. And it's not until people log, they're like, I never realized how much processed food I was actually eating. And not knowingly, it's just because that's the norm, right? We eat what's available to us. And so, you try to get them to eat as much fresh, but again, it is all based on, is this doable in your life? Right? Because if you put too much pressures on people to do all these things correctly, then it becomes overwhelming, and it's then also too much. So I take it on my job is like, I like to see, okay, where are you in your life right now? What can you handle? What changes can we move in your current state? And then reassess, once we do a few things consistently, where are we now? Okay, do you have bandwidth to do more? And it's a build, right? It's never here, just do all these things, because that's not going to work either, right? Specifically when we work in bodies that have been adapting to certainly a low energy state, or they're in a very stressed state. And so it's not like, here, just do this. It's, okay, where are you now? What can your body handle? Where's your mental state around these things? What food is available to you? What can your body handle? Because a lot of people that are very stressed have a really messed up GI. So we can only give them certain things. They're very sensitive to a lot of different foods. So it's like a game of Jenga. Um, and so it can be complex, but also simplified, because I always say to most people, like, look, just start, add a few things and assess, right? What you want to get is, we don't want to be afraid. Like, if you have a reaction to your food, just understand that maybe it's a temporary reaction. Maybe we need to work through some other things and then try it again. But I really try to get people off of good food, bad food. So, because if not, then we get mentally exhausted and start thinking, I can't have any food, because I have those people as well, right? That have gone down so many health rabbit holes to the point where they're like, everything is bad, I can't, and they're so stressed out about everything that that's creating an additional burden on them. And so we want to get away from that line of thinking.
I remember also hearing a new idea about fiber sources when I first got introduced to your work. Yeah. What would you like to say about that?
Fiber is one of those nuanced things. Obviously, in the medical health field, we definitely see you need to have enough fiber. People who have more fiber are healthier. The observational data does show us that. Like, if you look at observational data, and you'll pay people that mark on their forms that yep, I eat more fruits and vegetables, I have more fiber, they're usually going to have better health outcomes. And so that is true. Now, there's also a side of fiber we have to consider, because it is a bulk matter that your body's normally not breaking down. And if a digestive system is really compromised and you just shove a bunch of fiber into there, it usually can back it up even more and create additional problems, because your digestive system doesn't work because you're just lugging it full of fiber, right? Your doctor might tell you that, but your digestive system is a series of muscles that contracts through peristalsis to move food through your system. And that muscular contraction takes energy, right? It's fueled by your body's cells creating energy to make sure that's contracting. And so your digestive system is a very interesting system, because it when you are under stress, the signal to your digestion is just stop, slow down, don't go, because it's not essential, right? If you had to run from a lion, you're not going to be like, oh, let's think about digesting that food. No, your body's like, all blood pulls away from your digestive tract to go to your legs, to go to your brain, to get the hell out of there, right? We are not going to think about digestion. Right now, if you're in a chronic state of stress because you're in a bad relationship or your work stress, it's the same thing. Your body thinks it's the same thing as running from a lion. All stresses have the same biological response in your body. They are not different. You don't have a different biological response from running from a lion than, being yelled at by your boss. Same biological response. So blood flow leaves the digestive system and you start slowing that down. So then you're going to go, oh, I have constipation now. The first thing your doctor says, eat more fiber, right? Drink more water. And that can temporarily fix, as you're putting bulk in the system and it's pushing other things through the system. You're trying to hydrate it with some water, and that does temporarily fix things, but you are not fixing the underlying problem, which the body is under duress and the system is under energized. So that's where I like to address. Now, again, is fiber inherently bad? Depends on the context, right? Some people need more, but is that the reason your digestive system's working? No, your body needs to be fueled. And if the body is underfueled, then sometimes we want to give it fuel that doesn't have a lot of fiber in it, because fiber takes work. And sometimes we want to give your digestive system an easy food to digest, and that's usually a lower fiber source. That's why sometimes juice is a good food, because it doesn't have a lot of debris. It's easily, basically, we absorb all that fuel, and then that energy is usable to us. And again, so we're trying to take the burden off of our digestive system, because we don't want it to work very hard because it's being compromised. So it kind of all depends, and we have to decide, look, where is your state? What's going on with you? What do we need? If somebody's just not eating enough, like they're just eating 800 calories and now, their body's sucking every little thing out of there and that's why they're not going to the bathroom, that's very different than somebody eating like 3,000 calories and really stressed out and they're just backed up, right? Both constipated, but for different reasons and need to be addressed much differently.
And you were alluding earlier about fat, how when you were when the body needs a simple source of energy, that juice might satisfy if instead they reached for the ice cream. Now there's an overload on the fat side. Is there much else that you guide people about with fat?
Yeah. So fat, again, is just another source of energy. When we use and digest and process fat, it's a slower source of energy. I mean, it takes us more time to create energy from fat than carbohydrates, right? So fat actually goes and processes into our lymphatic system first before it even goes into our blood system. And then when we use fat in the cells, we create less energy over time. Okay. So it's just slower. And that's why when you are stressed, and that's why your nervous system prefers carbohydrates, can't even use fat as fuel. It only can use carbohydrates or ketones. So when you are stressed or in activity, your carbohydrate uses will always go up. Like your body's like, yep, we need more of this quick fuel source. And then when you're sleeping or at rest, then you actually will use less carbs and more fat, right? So when you're at sleep, you might use 90% of your fuel source as fat because it's a slower burn. It's more accessible. There's less oxidative kind of damage at that point in time. And so just knowing that your body does sway. When you're just sitting here talking to me right now, we might be at a 50-50 split. Some cells are using fat, some are using carbs, some are using a combination, but we can use both in this state. But as we start to consume more oxygen because we're out of breath and we're going into more activity and we need it quicker, then carbohydrate needs are going to go up. Both are important, right? Because one thing fat does is fat will stimulate your gallbladder to release bile. Bile is needed to break and emulsify fat or break it down. What bile also does, though, it contains all the broken down byproducts that your liver is trying to get rid of. So, we want to stimulate that bile because we want to dump those byproducts into the intestines so we can excrete them. So fat is important for detoxification because of just that kind of effect that it does stimulate your gallbladder. You want to release that bile. And then again, and that's where fiber is also important because when it dumps the bile into the intestinal area, you take those fibers, you attach it to all the toxicity, bile kind of recirculates, we reuse it, but then all the byproducts get released out of your system.
Again, that analogy you had with the fireplace and the size of the log that's needed for the job. I think I was bathing myself in fat. I think I got all gung ho with ancestral fats, like, oh, saturated fat is a miracle food, and I'll have my eggs with my butter, with my da 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 da. So
Mm-hmm.
with my cream, and I think I that was like throwing a wet blanket on the fire because it was just way too and not enough fiber then to carry away the stuff it was squishing out, right? So what about, and I'm pretty sure I know your point of view about fasting. I'm pretty sure I know that you would rather have a body that knows food is coming and is getting enough. What is there anything you'd like to say about that trend, intermittent fasting?
Yeah, I mean, so in the context, so we'll use it in different contexts. In the context of healing, in the context of somebody's going to a low adaptive state, then no, I wouldn't have them fast. I would not be an ideal situation. Obviously you hear about people that do water fasts for a month and they are like, I've healed and I lost all this weight and I've cured diabetes. And that's not a lie. That does happen. Now, that same individual also is not those people are like not doing anything. Like they're not living their life. They're literally resting all the time. And so if we go back into knowing that, you look, when you're not under a lot of stress and you're sleeping and resting and not doing a lot, you can get by with utilizing, 90% fat all the time. You're not going into a lot of gluconeogenesis. Your body's releasing fat, you're using it. You're releasing fat, you're using it. And so you're not breaking muscular tissue down as much. You still will break some down, but when you rest and sleep, you can get by with these water fasts and so forth. But in your day-to-day life that is stressful, that you are, working and under fluorescent lights all the time and, you're exposed to tons of chemicals and all the things, we have like a life that's chronically fairly stressful these days. So you want to support the system and not just go without food. And, so it does, fasting is inherently stressful in the system. If the body is healthy and you, for religious purposes or for whatever reason, you like to fast once a week and you're healthy, then go for it. do what works for you. I'm not totally against that, but also know that it can have a negative effect on systems that need support. And if you're finding, oh my God, every time I fast, I feel like dog shit and I'm tired and I can't sleep, well, then maybe don't do that because it's creating a negative response in your system.
I have a funny story on that one. About 10 years ago, I did the master cleanse, the lemonade, whatever, with the
Mhm.
maple and the lemon,
Cayenne pepper. Yeah.
cayenne pepper. And my partner at the time who was doing it, just day by day, glowingly healthy, just dropping the weight. And here
Hmm.
I am, something like 8 days, 9 days in, and I have lost 1 pound and I am just freezing to death. And I couldn't, I could hardly do anything. Um, but by the 10th day, and he had lost something like 15 pounds, who knows what he lost, but it was just really working for him and me totally not. Until then, I had some kind of bone broth or some kind of nourishment, and then vroom, like 9 pounds of some kind of held inflammation just dropped out of my body. And the funny thing is, I was kind of what's weird is that my skin and everything looks so amazing. I got all these compliments like, "Oh, you look amazing." And I was like, "That's funny. I feel like hell." And then but then I thought, "Well, maybe I could do this more." And I went to my acupuncturist. I was getting thermography because of some other stuff I was just going through checking up certain things. And this was maybe 2 days after the fast ended, and they almost sent me to the hospital.
Hmm.
They said, "Whatever's going on with your liver and gallbladder and your thyroid, this is urgent. This this is very bad." And I was like, "Oh, I didn't tell you. I just finished a 10-day fast 2 days ago,"
Hmm.
or whatever. And they were like, "Well, that's not for you." They said, "That was dangerous for you." Any comments about that?
What I can say about fasting. So a lot of times, specifically skin issues, a lot of skin issues are the result of an irritated GI. Usually you have a lot of permeability, you may have a leaky gut, and things are getting through the intestinal lining into your blood system, and your skin can be responding to that. So when you remove everything from the GI system, and basically the GI is not working and could heal, a lot of times the skins will improve, right? So that's why people notice that their skin looks so much better on a fast. Also, when people do carnivore, keto-based diets that are very low carb, carbs can be more of an irritant to the GI system. And so when they all of a sudden just eat a ton of fat or just protein, they notice how much their skin improve. And also a lot of autoimmune issues can improve because a lot of them are GI related. There are a lot of them, right? If you remember, 80% of your immune system is located in your digestive area, into your intestinal area. And if all of a sudden we just remove things, or we remove the irritants, then that heals and they get improvements. So there's not like saying that these things don't have positive responses from them. Certain diets, they do, right? I'm not going to take away from all these people. Like, I've had this happen and my guts got better and my autoimmunity got better, my skin got better, my allergies got better. All true. Um, However, in the context of how do we fuel the system better energetically, carbohydrates are still the macronutrient that we would want to utilize, right? And so with the context of those, right, they can also slowly, and I've worked with some people coming off of these diets, where you would slowly start to incorporate maybe lower fibrous foods into their diet that have carbohydrates to kind of help support the system again without creating a lot of that irritation. And again, that's what comes into the fibrous part, because yes, fiber is more of an irritant to the GI. And so, and that's why a lot of people, again, they get these benefits from fasting because their digestive system is getting a break. And again, if we do correlate that a lot of skin issues are correlated to your digestive system, it would make sense that we give that digestive system a rest and now our skin issues get better.
Wow, you're so wise. I love the nuance. And we'll be wrapping it up here, but I've got to ask about caffeine
Mhm.
because I love coffee. I put a little bit of half and half in it every morning with just a tiny bit of sugar. But on days when I'm feeling tired midday, I want one of those sweet drinks. I want a yerba mate that's like a green tea, a highly sweet drink. And I've stopped those, but I'm having this internal debate about the need. I need some kind of energy lift midday. So, and I would be better to grab some juice, I suppose, or some fruit. Any comments about caffeine in general?
So I'm a proponent. I love caffeine. It's a thermogenic, anything that, and it supports how quickly your body utilizes glucose. So in my opinion, that's a good thing. However, some systems, if they aren't utilizing glucose properly, or you're on a low carb diet, or you are finding you're sensitive because you're very stressed, caffeine is not going to be your friend. And so we have to build the system first, because we don't want to give someone a thermogenic if they're already in a stress system. And so we got to like make sure that body is supported properly. That's why a lot of people, if they've been doing black coffee and they're like, I feel like it's stimulating, I feel cracked out when I do that. And I'm like, well, instead of doing that, eat breakfast first and then try your coffee. Do you get a better response? A lot of times, yep, it's not as bad. And so if they're still having a response, usually I'll take coffee out for a while until their body kind of self-regulates, and then we might add it back in, because a well-running system, we're not utilizing it to kind of crack ourselves out or get that burst. We're using it because it's supporting energy production. And as long as the fuel is available, it works well. I would say to you, if you're getting dips in energy in the day, I would say, okay, what are you eating for breakfast, and is it enough to support you? Do you need to have more solid food? Does it need to be bigger? Is there enough protein to stabilize you? Like, what is going on? Because a lot of times it's that meal, and when you maybe make it bigger, or maybe add more protein to it or whatever, it tends to stabilize people a little bit better or longer. And so if you're finding you're dipping, yes, it could be like your body's needing more fuel. If you just gave yourself juice, you're going to go whoop, spike it right back up again, and then you're going to go right back down again. So there's a kind of a rhyme or reason. Usually for most individuals, like if they're eating carbs only, yes, if you're having a crash in blood sugar, it will be the quickest thing to bring you back up. Certainly if you're going to exercise and you need fuel, then yes, that's also a good thing. Or if you're doing a longer like endurance kind of activity. When I used to do a lot of running or long distance biking, I mean, I found when I was out doing that, I was probably one of the smallest people in doing these, training session, but I would eat the most, because at the time my body was it was just running at such a high rate. I was just constantly eating and drinking and booze. And because my body was just running through things so fast, where all these other people had been, cycling for long periods of time and adapted. They could go hours and hours and hours and hours eating, but I was just keeping my system running, and I just had to eat a lot, because if not, I mean, I could, but I was so hungry. And so my body, I would eat a lot. And as I continued along the training, I would become more efficient so that I could go longer. And again, when you're training or trying to win a race, you would want that. You don't want to be having to eat all the time. But if you really want a well-running supportive metabolism that is producing a lot of heat, then you want to like not do those long distance activities, or at least all the time.
What nuance, Kate. I love it. And so for our audience, how to learn more about you, first of all, your new book is out, Better Energy.
Yeah. So the better energy is kind of a continuum from what we refer to as the bioenergetic perspective, which is basically all health is correlated to how well you're producing energy. That's how we see things. And it would make sense, because if you don't produce energy well, you usually have lots of symptoms and illness. And when you're a better energy producer, you feel much better, you're warmer, better mood, better sleep, better everything, better energy. So I went into the nuances of your systems in the second book. It's very in depth. There's a lot of information. I tell people to use it as a research guide, because it answers a lot of questions about your systems and why things are the way they are. The first book will talk more about the foods and understanding why these foods are supportive and good for you. So it gives you more context. They are different. They work with each other, but they will help you for sure.
I love it. And do you also work with, it sounds like you also work with clients.
I do work with a limited amount of clients, and so I do, certainly take on clients. It's for people that really want to get into specifics if they have issues, or they've been going down the health rabbit holes or whatever it is, and they've tried everything and they're like, I don't know why this isn't working. And a lot of people, because they work in certain boxes, they've been told to be put on a certain diet without taking into an understanding of the energy perspective kind of lens. And when you go through that lens, things will shift. And I think it just changes how people think about things. And when we can change how you think about things and you respond differently, you'll make different decisions. It doesn't feel as stressful through kind of trying to guide through this health world, because yeah, the health world has become another stress. And before we had this industry, we just ate real food and we just did it. And most people were thin and we didn't have as many illness. We were sick and ill, because, people were smoking or drinking, or, maybe we didn't have, I'm not opposed to certain medications. We definitely have better drugs these days, better antibiotics, better treatments. But, now the systems, we have too plentiful, and there's too much decision making. There's too much exposure, and we have too many supplements, and there's too much industry from the wellness world. So, that's why I'm like, get back to the basics, understand your body. Here's the foods, and let's, go with that.
I'm definitely going to read every page of your book because I love the idea of dialing in the nuance instead of these polarities and isms that make it hard to move forward without doing too many extreme things that just hurt us. You didn't even mention PUFAs though when we talked about fat. Do you have anything to say about those and what they are?
Well, I always have something to say. I mean, it's a very controversial topic. PUFAs are polyunsaturated fats, and like all these seed oils that people keep talking about, they're all polyunsaturated fat. They're just kind of liquid oils. They're kind of in the wrong body, more prone to oxidative stress. When we metabolize them as humans, we produce things called aldehydes that are very toxic to our system. In and of themselves, they're not like something you'll take and immediately have a negative result. We look at them more like they're a slow drip of metabolic damage. Uh, Unfortunately, we don't have good long-term data on these things. Most of the trials that will kind of exchange, saturated fats for PUFAs or PUFAs for saturated fat are very short term. And because the polyunsaturated fats have a cholesterol lowering effect on the system, they are certainly pushed as a good fat in most health circles because look, they lower cholesterol, they lower LDLs. That's all certainly good. So that means they promote healthy hearts. That's why they're called the healthy heart fats. And yes, if you just look at them that way, we would say, okay, that should be seen as a healthy thing. But I talk about them in both books. I talk about them even deeper in the second book because I try to give people the nuance. Like I said, here's the medical way, and this is why they support, and this is why they're saying what they're saying. If we look through it through the lens of energy, we see the cracks in the breaks because they gum up the system per se. It isn't a quick immediate thing, but it does happen over time. And so anything that's going to inhibit energy production is not something good in my view long term. And just because something lowers your cholesterol in the short term doesn't mean it's supportive in the long term. So we always have to kind of say, in the health world, they like to isolate things. I mean, they'll look at one outcome. But I'm like, well, what if we looked at that one outcome, but then we stretched it out? What other things are happening? And when we do that, and then the few studies that we do have on the polyunsaturated fats, when we look at it for a longer stretch of time, we start to see, okay, it lowered your cholesterol, but we see higher chances of cancer, higher chances of all these other things going on. So that needs to be accounted for. And, just because something helps you immediately, right? Like alcohol will lower your blood sugar, but we're not going to tell all diabetics, well, just drink a lot. That's the solution, right? So we have to understand some of the mechanisms of what's happening, and then also kind of understand, like, again, from an energy perspective, what it's doing to the kind of the mitochondria, to the cell, how is it affecting, and then kind of look at it from that lens. But again, if I would look at it just from a cholesterol lowering lens, then I would go, yep, you should take that because it's lowering your cholesterol.
I remember learning about how some of the cholesterol lowering drugs, the research behind them they tracked that the cholesterol was lower, but they didn't report that they only extended a few days or months to the overall lifespan, and in some cases actually shortened the lifespan. So to your point, all the research needs to be looked at too critically in terms of what are the study parameters, what is the audience, and what does this have to do with longevity? And what does it have to do with my own system? And that's one thing I love about your work is giving us some metrics and some rationale into learning about ourselves so that we can ultimately drive our own car here. And you really helped me with that, Kate.
Well,
So
good. I'm glad that it's the idea is to give the power back to the person. And so, because I feel like, everything's kind of explained and just do this, do that without like, well, why are we doing that? Well, what is that measuring? And, yes, and I try to put it in a way that take my 10 years of work, and I try to glop it all into these 2 books. That's why I say use them as a reference, right? Some of them, it's not meant to read all the way through because your brain's going to hurt, but it's like, hey, this issue is going on. Let me help me understand this specific issue. What does that mean? What could be happening? What is a route I could take and a better understanding so that I can fix it on my own? I believe the body, when you give it the right ingredients, will work for you effectively, right? And that's what we want to do. We want to be able to, how can I give my system the right ingredients so it can do what it needs to, so it can create the energy to support my system versus giving this drug or this medication or supplement so I can just remove a symptom without actually fixing anything and why you're having that symptom.
Excellent. So Better Energy is the book. KateDeering.com is your website. You're also on Instagram at Kate Deering, right?
Kate Deering Fitness on Instagram
Kate
and
Deering.
Facebook.
Okay, great. That's Kate Deering out of San Diego. And thanks for tuning in.
You're welcome. Thanks, Deb.